Hello and welcome to the Linux command line video series. In this video, we will cover the commands for copying, moving, and deleting files, as well as commands for creating and deleting directories. To make a copy of a file, you can use the copy command, which is cp. The cp command copies one or more files or an entire directory structure to another location. The simplest usage of cp is cp space source space destination, which will make a duplicate of the source file to the path name specified as the destination. Let's look at some examples. So let's go ahead and cd back to our home folder, and then I'm going to make a copy of this file called etc shells, and I'm going to copy it to our current working folder, which is dot. So once we hit return, Linux gives us no feedback as to what it did, but it did something. So let's take a look at what it did by typing the ls command. And here we can see that there is now a file called shells. So the command we just did made a copy of that file in our current working folder. Now let's try doing this. cp of etc shells. And then this time we're going to specify a file name. So what this is going to do is it's going to make a copy of that file shells into the current folder and rename it as my shells. So once again, we hit return and we get no feedback. So let's go ahead and do an ls and see what we get. And sure enough, there is the file called my shells. Now let's take a look to see what happens if the second argument is a name of a folder instead of a name of a file. So if we do cp of /etc/shells space and then desktop, what this is going to do is going to make a copy of the file shells and put it into the folder called desktop. And once again, let's go ahead and verify. So now as you can see, we do have the copy of the file. You can also copy multiple files by using the wildcard character or just specifying more than one file. The last argument will be the destination folder. So let's try copying a few files from the etc folder that starts with the letters HOST. So we are going to type copy space /etc/host star, right? That's a wildcard character, space /temp. So what this is going to do is that it is going to copy all of those files that start with HOST within the etc folder to the folder called /temp. So once we hit the return key, again, we get no feedback. So let's get our own feedback by typing ls of /temp. And what we do see here is that there is a bunch of files that start with HOST, which were not here before. So far, we have used cp to copy one file or multiple files, but we can also use cp to copy entire directories. But before we do that, let's talk about options for commands. Most Linux commands will have options that you can add to the command to customize how it works. With a cp command, some common options are -r for recursive copy of directories and their contents, -v for verbose, so it shows messages as the copy is performed, and -i for interactive mode, which will prompt a user before overwriting an existing file. The way you use an option is to just specify that option after the name of the command. So let's go back and look at how to copy a directory. So the way we do that is we do copy -r, which is the recursive option, and then we tell it we want to copy the folder /boot/grub and everything underneath it to the /temp folder. So once we hit return, again, we get no feedback. So let's go ahead and take a look at the /temp directory. And sure enough, there is the folder called grub. and everything else underneath it. Now let's take a look at the -v option for the cp command. So if we do cp-v of /etc/shells to desktop, what this is going to do is that now we have it in verbose mode. So now you notice that once we hit the return key, it actually gives us some feedback. It's telling us it's making a copy of this file, the /etc/shells file, and putting it here as desktop/shells. Next, let's take a look at the -i option for interactive. So we're going to do cp-i of /etc shells, and once again we're going to put it to the desktop. So basically we are changing it to the -i option this time. And notice once we hit the return key, the system is going to prompt you and ask you, hey, do you want to overwrite the file that is already there? Because in the last command we just did, right, we already created this file called desktop shells. And now we're basically repeating the command, which means we're going to have to overwrite that same file. So for each file that is in danger of being overwritten, the system will prompt you to answer a yes or no. So you can just type the letter Y or the letter N, depending on what you want to do. And for some distros, the interactive option is turned on by default, so you don't even have to specify it. A few caveats about options for Linux commands. First, for most commands, the order of the options are interchangeable unless the option expects something after it. So for example, if we do cp-vir space /boot/grub space /temp, that is the same thing as if you did cp-rvi of /bootgrub/temp, and which is the same as cp-irv of /boot/grub/temp. And you can even spread out the options by specifying each one of them with a dash. So you can do cp-r-i-v and then /bootgrub/temp. Secondly, the options are not universal across all commands. For example, a lot of commands use -v for verbose, like we have seen, but for some commands, -v means version. So be aware which options go with which commands. Next, we are going to take a look at how to move a file. So to move a file, you can use the move command, which is mv. The mv command moves one or more files or an entire directory structure to another location. The simplest usage of mv is mv space source space destination, which moves the source file to the destination path as specified. If the second argument is a file name, then the file will be renamed as well. So let's cd back to our home folder, make sure we're in the right place. And what we want to do is we want to move this file that we had created earlier, desktop shells, and we want to move it to /temp. Okay, so the move command will move whatever you specify first, which is the source, to the destination location. So when we hit enter, we get no feedback. So let's take a look here, and the desktop folder and the file shells is gone. And let's take a look at /temp, and we do see that the file is here. Now let's move multiple files. So we can move the files that we had moved earlier, all of those files that start with host, and let's move them all to the desktop. Right? So once again, the wildcard will match multiple files, and we want to move all of those files to the folder desktop. So when we hit enter, because there's no feedback, so let's get our own feedback. We're going to take a look at /temp, and we see that those files are no longer here, right? The files that started with host are all gone. And let's go ahead and take a look at the desktop folder. And sure enough, they have now appeared. Now let's move a folder similar to that. that we had done before. We're going to move the /temp/grub folder to desktop, right? So instead of specifying a file or multiple files, we can specify a folder and then a destination. So once we hit enter, once again, we get no feedback. Let's take a look at /temp. That folder grub is no longer there. Let's take a look at desktop. And there it is. The last thing we want to look at with the mv command is how to rename a file. So let's cd into /temp. Take a look at what's here. And we still have this file here called shells. So let's say we want to go ahead and rename that file shells to new shells. So all we have to do is say mv, the file that we want to rename, and then this is the new name, right? So the Linux command line interpreter is pretty smart in that it will figure out if this argument is a folder, then it will move this file into that folder. But if this is not a folder, then it is going to basically rename this file with this particular name. So once we do that, we get no feedback. So let's go ahead and type ls. And sure enough, you don't see the file called shells anymore, but in its place, we see the file name new shells. And much like the cp command, the mv command also has different options that you can use. The two common ones that we are going to see is -v for verbose again, and then -i for interactive. Next, let's take a look at how to remove a file. To remove or delete a file, you can use the remove command, which is rm. The rm command removes one or more files or an entire directory structure. The simplest usage of rm is to just say rm space and then the name of the file. So let's go ahead and cd back to our home folder. And then what I'm going to do is do rm /temp new shells. So once again, to delete a file, all you got to do is say rm space and then the path name to that file. Once you hit enter, you can basically verify yourself and take a look. And sure enough, new shells is no longer there. Now let's remove multiple files. In order to do that, you can specify all the names of the files you want to remove after rm. In this case, we want to remove all of the files in the desktop folder that starts with host, so we can use a wildcard. Once we hit return, we get no feedback. So let's take a look at the desktop folder. And sure enough, all of those files that starts with host are now gone. To remove a folder, we will need to use an option with rm. Some of the common options for rm are -v for verbose, -i for interactive mode, -r for recursive removal, and -f for force removal. In this example, if we want to remove the grub folder within desktop, we can use the -r option for recursive removal. And I'm also going to use the -f option so that the system is not going to prompt us for every file that's in there. So when we hit return, we get no feedback. So let's go ahead and do an ls of desktop. And we see that there is no more grub folder. A few caveats about removing or deleting files in the Linux command line. There is no recycle bin. So if you make a mistake, you can't retrieve the file from the recycle bin. There is no undo. Be very careful when using the -f option. You could inadvertently destroy your system if you are not careful. Let's say that your intention is to remove everything in your documents folder, but you make a typo and added the space in the wrong place. So let's say this is what you intended to do, rm-rf of documents, and then you're going to say *.* for all the files. But somehow you made a mistake and added a space right there. What this is going to do now is that it is going to remove all of the files underneath the documents folder recursively. and without asking any questions, right? Because there's a -r and -f. And then it's going to go to the slash, which is the root of the file system. And from there, delete all the files. So this is going to recursively travel down the entire file tree, deleting everything from your file system. So this is dangerous. So what I recommend is that when you type these commands for rm-rf, actually put in the ls command instead first, right? Once you think you have it, you can type the enter key and take a look at the return. So for the command line, it comes back and says, hey, I'm going to get rid of all these files and also in the documents folder, this file. Well, clearly this doesn't look right, right? So what you can do is use the up arrow to go back and fix that error. And now, if you do it again, you can see that, yes, that is the folders and the files that I want to get rid of. Once you have verified that the file specifier is correct, you can use the up arrow and then the left arrow to go back, and now you can do rm-rf. To create a folder, you can use the mkdir command. That's mkdir. Mkdir creates one or more directories that are specified on the command line. So let's go ahead and make a new folder called newdir. And when you hit return, you get no feedback, much like other Linux commands. So let's type ls to get verification. And sure enough, there is a new folder called newdir. So much like the other commands, mkdir has options, and one of the more common options is the -v for verbose, which shows you messages of what mkdir is actually doing. So let's go ahead and cd into newdir. Take a look in there, there's nothing there. And we're going to create more directories. This time we are going to use the verbose option. We're going to make a folder called directory 1, directory 2, directory 3. And this time, notice when we have the -v option, right, we get actually some feedback as to what the command is actually doing. So you may find this helpful, especially in the beginning when you actually are not sure exactly what's going on. So let's go ahead and verify by doing an ls. And sure enough, those 3 folders are there. And then we can go ahead and copy different files into those folders, right? So we can copy the file etc time zone into the folder called D2. And we're going to see what we're going to do with that next. To delete a folder, you can use the rmdir command. The rmdir command deletes one or more empty directories that are specified on the command line. So let's cd back to our home folder, and then I'm going to do an ls to show you that we still have new there. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use rmdir to remove newdir, and when we hit return, we are greeted with the error that the directory is not empty, right? Because remember, we added those 3 folders in there. So it is not empty. And I said earlier that rmdir only works on empty folders. So what do we do? Well, there's a couple of different ways that we can handle this. The first thing we can do is we can delete the individual files and folders within newdir first, and then we can use rmdir to delete it once it's empty. The other thing we can do is use the rm command that we had learned earlier with the -rf for recursive and force to remove the newdir. So let's go ahead and do it the hard way, because the easy way to do is just that, right? Just do rm space -rf of newdir. That would remove everything. But let's do things the hard way. We can do rmdir of newdir /d1. Right? We know that's an empty folder, so that should work. And then we're gonna do an ls of newdir, and d1 is gone. So let's go ahead and do an rmdir of newdir /d2. And that's going to fail, right? Because once again, we copied a file, the time zone file, into there. So what we can do is you can use the rm-rf and then newdir /d2. And then we can do an ls of newdir again. And then rmdir of newdir slash p3. Whoops. D3. And so now newdir should be empty. And once again, just like everything else, there are options for rmdir. And one of the common ones is -v for verbose, which is going to tell you what the command is doing. So we can do rmdir-v of newdir. And now it tells us that it is going to remove newdir, which it did. And we can verify by typing ls. And sure enough, newdir is gone. We learned earlier that the mkdir command is used to create an empty folder. Now let's take a look at ways to create an empty file, or just files in general. The first way to create a file, or an empty file, is to use the cat command. If you do cat and then redirect into a file name, give it a file name, and once you hit enter, it's going to wait for you to type in some text. Okay, and when you're done, you hit Control D, that's Control Delta, and it's going to give you your prompt back. So basically what we just did was we just added those two lines, or created those two lines into the file called new file. And sure enough, that's what it is. Now if we want to create an empty file, all we have to do is just hit Control D without typing anything else. So now if you cat the empty file, it's basically just empty. So that's one way of creating an empty file. Another way of creating an empty file is by using the touch command. So if you type touch, and then the name of a file, what it does is that it just creates a file with that name. And so there it is. If the file does not exist, then the system will create an empty file with that name. If that file does exist within the system, then the system will update the timestamps of that file. Alright, so that brings us to the end of this video, where we learned about the command cp to make copies of files, the command mv to move files, the command rm to remove files, the command mkdir to make a directory, the command rmdir to remove a directory. Hope you enjoyed it, and if so, click on the thumbs up icon to like this video. Please hit the subscribe button to get notified when the next video comes out. Also, please leave me messages in the comment section below so I know what you liked and didn't like, or what you may want to see in future videos. See you next time.